Hey everyone, welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and today on the show I have Cory Hills, creator of percussive storytelling. Cory has created a unique career based on a performance style he invented for himself. What he has created is children's stories that he wrote and plays percussion along with in the form of live shows, CDs, and books. In this episode, Cory describes how he created percussive storytelling, starting in the same way most of us start, by training on our main instrument, to the path he followed afterward, which ultimately led him to find not only his own voice as an artist, but a unique career. Cory also shares his experiences and resources for really out-of-the-box programs to check out if you want something radically different than the norm for your educational and artistic path. But before we get started, I want to thank Fix Music for sponsoring Crushing Classical Podcast. FixMusic.com is the online resource for high-quality, affordable sheet music. There are some new offerings at Fix available that you'll want to know about. Now there's organ music, a large choral music selection, as well as orchestra parts that you would need for concerts or auditions. And now they are also actively working with choral and orchestra directors to help plan seasons. So if you happen to be a program director and you want some help on choosing pieces for your season, contact Fix Music today through their website. And as always, free shipping on all domestic orders. Check out fixmusic.com for your sheet music needs and use the link in the show notes to receive 10% off your first order. Let's get started. All right, welcome, Cory. Thank you so much for being on Crushing Classical. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, Cory, you are a percussionist, a founder of your own unique percussive storytelling. Do you call it percussive storytelling, or do you call it splat, boom, bang?
Percussive storytelling is the name of the program. Splat, boom, bang is sort of my moniker, my brand.
Okay.
My email address, my website, my YouTube, Facebook.
I love it.
That's sort of the fun name of the business. But percussive storytelling is the program itself.
Okay, I can't wait to hear all about it. You're also a composer and an active performer, recording artist in LA. You play with the Los Angeles Percussion Quartet, and I'm sure lots of other things. What I love the most is that you really created this unique career that was specific to what you wanted to do for your life, but you started pretty conventionally, right? So tell me, just like the start, where you started, where you did undergrad.
I did my undergrad at Northwestern University in Chicago, and I was, for lack of a better term, a standard classical musician. I don't actually know what that is, but it was pretty standard. It's Northwestern wasn't a conservatory, but it was a school of music.
Yeah.
And it was pretty conventional as far as the education. For all instrumentalists, we worked really hard on excerpts. We worked hard on solos, repertoire, truly just building up your chops and building up your ensemble abilities, which I think is pretty common in most settings. And for undergrad, that's great, because for me, I just learned and got better as a player physically. Mm-hmm. Meaning I was able to play these things, which is great. Not necessarily understanding what I was playing,
right.
Or
did you understand at that point
intellectual curiosity about what I was doing? It was more of just kind of being robotic and going through the motions.
And that's what you kind of have to do to train for auditions. And so, did you realize that you were essentially training for that kind of career at that point, or were you just like, oh, this is what percussionists do?
At first, that's what I thought you did. Mm-hmm. And so I just went along with it. And for the first couple of years, the more formative years of your education, that's great, because I just spent hours a day in either the practice room or in ensembles. But that was just what you needed to do anyway. You still have to better yourself at your instrument. So it was a necessary time. But then when you get a little bit older and those skills are there, then you start thinking about what you're doing and thinking about what you actually enjoy doing from all that stuff.
Right.
And that's when I discovered that I was really not into the orchestral scene. I have nothing against it whatsoever. I love the music. And I always will. But I just was not right for that path. And I'm fortunate, I think, to have discovered that early on, because I think some people go for years and years and years and don't figure it out, or still try to fit a square peg into a round hole. But for me, it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I needed a little more freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of exploration. And so I started branching out into new music.
Okay.
Essentially commissions, playing new pieces by composers, and really getting into pieces that were based in theatrical language. So
did this happen at Northwestern, or was this after?
toward the end of my time at Northwestern, in large part due to Eighth Blackbird being in residence there.
Okay.
I became good friends and still to this day with the percussionist Matthew Duvall, who's been a great friend and mentor to me over the years. And so I really got into the new music scene and theatrical percussion, which is pieces for like voice and percussion. And I guess the very end of my studies, I ended up applying and being accepted to a master's program in Australia, studying with a woman named Vanessa Tomlinson, who is a renowned theatrical percussionist.
So was it the Eighth Blackbird people that told you about the person in Australia? How did you discover that theatrical percussion was a thing?
Yeah, so I just had done a couple pieces, because there are a few standard pieces in the percussion repertoire that involve speech in percussion. One is To the Earth by Frederick Rzewski. It's a piece for 4 clay pots and spoken text. And I did that and a couple other pieces like it, and really enjoyed that aspect of percussion. And one of my professor's friends was this Swedish percussionist who was always kind of around. They were really good friends, and so he would be in town, and he was this improviser and sort of crazy Swedish percussionist. And he had just judged a competition in Geneva, and he was in Chicago with us, and he said, "Cory, you need to go to Australia and study with Vanessa." I was like, who? She had just gotten the job in Australia and judged this competition. And as part of those competitions, you also do recitals and other things. And he was blown away by her. And so he told me about her, and I just reached out. This is, beginning of internet days. So there really wasn't a lot of stuff on there. I still sent my audition tape on a VHS that I had to get. I had to get it changed to the right format so that it could play in Australia.
Oh, geez, I didn't even realize that would be a thing.
Yeah, you can't just YouTube it anymore or send over a.
But they
file.
didn't have the same VHS in Australia. Oh
no, yeah, it was different format. Yeah, and then I basically took a huge leap of faith. I never met her, and I moved to Australia.
Wow.
Just like that,
So you just arrived there, like, where in Australia?
In Brisbane.
Oh, okay. So you just showed up by yourself with all your drums and percussion instruments, and...
I went with 2 suitcases and a backpack, and...
Did she pick you up, or did somebody pick you up, or were you on your own completely?
I had worked out some housing for a couple of weeks while I figured the lay of the land, and so that person picked me up, and just kind of went from there.
It seems so crazy and gutsy to just move across to the other side of the planet, essentially.
I guess so. When I think about it now, I think, wow, what the hell was I thinking? but it was quite easily the best decision I ever made professionally.
Yeah.
I mean, every single thing I've done has basically come from working with Vanessa. And so the way that I describe it is my professor, Michael Burrett at Northwestern, who's now at Eastman, who's phenomenal percussionist and phenomenal teacher. That school and his studio taught me how to be a percussionist, gave me all the tools, nuts and bolts to be a percussionist. And Vanessa taught me how to be an artist.
Okay, you know what? I want to talk about that word a little bit because I think it's a word that I personally haven't really used to describe myself as a classical musician, and I wonder how free generally musicians feel to be able to call themselves an artist because, you know, several years ago, not even several, just a couple of years ago, I just sort of, and it's been an ongoing journey over the last 2 years to realize, wow, like, I really am not creative in my career at all. I just show up and I play the music that's on the stand and I get paid for it. And like to start as I started interviewing people, that was when I started to look at what I really want to do. And I think there's a drive. I think inside every musician, there's a desire to be more creative and artistic. But it's cool that you discovered that essentially, was that a master's degree?
Yes.
Okay. It's cool that you discovered, because most of the time people's master's degrees are just, at least for me, and I know it's the case for most people, it's a continuation of what you were doing in undergrad. You just keep doing the same thing for a couple more years because you're not ready. Time. Yeah, you buy time. That's exactly what I did. So it's incredible that you got to see this about yourself.
Yeah, and to an extent, I chose an area that I wanted to explore. And I knew nothing really about. It's just an area that I really enjoyed, like the theatrical percussion and improvisation, which we worked on a lot. And that year was just spent going down a rabbit hole, so to speak. And I went really far down that rabbit hole. Started doing more fringe performances, experimental music, avant-garde, European complexity, just really pushing these boundaries of me as a musician. But really that was just a year of exploration, you know, of trying different things and seeing what resonated with me and what didn't. And then what really happened that year that I can truly point to is that my voice emerged.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important. And I wish that good fortune upon every musician and artist, because it is a truly wonderful feeling to perform a piece and actually feel that you are truly a part of it, or it's a part of you. And that's what happened that year is I developed my voice. And so then I could play pieces or look at pieces and determine whether or not it actually fit into my aesthetic. And that's pretty valuable as you develop.
Yeah.
Because then when you're
you get to decide, you're like, does this fit me? Does this fit what I want to do and who I am?
Exactly. Yep. And while I was there, I was introduced to the head of music at this place in Italy called Institute Fabrica. And he had come over to Australia because at the Australian Music Festival, I don't even remember the name of it, they were premiering a work of his that he was writing, and he was also conducting the orchestra. And he was looking for soloists to be part of this 2-hour piece that involved like live satellite feeds to 3 different cities. It was crazy. It was called Credo. And one of the people was a didgeridoo artist named William Barton, who's sort of the international guru of didgeridoo, and he's responsible for bringing it into the Western classical scene. And I was friends with William, and I met this guy, Andrea, who headed the music department, and he selected me and a couple other people to come over to Italy for a year to hang out and eventually be a part of the culminating performance back in Australia for this festival. So in the meantime, while I was in Italy, like it didn't take a year for me to learn this music. it was
Right.
a relatively easy piece, but while we were there, we were just part of the program, and the program was very peculiar. It's a research, they call it an arts research think tank, or basically I had a fellowship, a research fellowship in exploratory arts, which really is a lot of confusing words strung together. But we were at this building that was part of the United Colors of Benetton. It's a clothing corporation.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I grew up in the '80s and early '90s. In high school, I totally know what United Colors of Benetton is.
They
Most
were
people
really
should
famous.
remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, they were really famous for their controversial ad campaigns.
Yep.
Where they truly push boundaries as far as gender equality, racial equality, religious freedom. And the founder, Luciano Benetton, is and to this day remains a huge patron of the arts and really likes to push these boundaries, and so surrounds himself with other artists and marketers and designers who do that. And so he started this think tank, which is on their it's as part of their headquarters. And it's this separate building where there were, I think, 40 of us under the age of 24 from 30-some different countries in different fields of arts, from music to film to graphic design, writing, interactive design, so like computer art. There were some robotic artists there. And we were essentially given this space, freedom, and money to create. And we had to do projects for them. So I worked on like an ad campaign, an anti-smoking ad campaign by the United Nations. And just being there, you just do this stuff. And I did like so many fashion things. Oh God, like runway shoots and music. And
so they would just say, hey, Cory, we want you to do this. We want you to be creative and artistic with your abilities, percussion. Did they want you to write music or play? Or
you had to do, when you were there, you participated in other people, like you would just collaborate. So people, like a filmmaker would be doing a film and they would need music, or an industrial design person would create something for a show or a design fair or something, and it was like an installation piece. So there needed to be a film element and a music element, and so we'd work together on things like that. But then everybody had to do a personal project.
Okay.
And most people had to apply for that. I was selected because of this thing in Australia.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't have to apply, and I would never even have found out about this place had I not been in Australia and meeting this person who was built the piece around William, the didgeridoo player.
Right.
It was just completely circumstantial, and he was looking for Australian percussionists, and then he found an American one who was studying in Australia. The whole thing was very interesting, and the whole year was beyond interesting. It was like fringe arts central.
I bet. I mean, I went on the website and I was like, whoa, I mean, how do you even know if you fit in here if you're just coming onto the site, randomly? Like,
I have no clue. But when I was there, I had an epiphany moment, and that was when I was doing all of this fringe stuff. I realized that there was no audience, or the audience was very small or very selective, meaning people who already knew what you were doing, people who already got what you were doing.
Yeah.
And while that's fine, I didn't like the disconnect from my voice to them. I felt like there are more people that could be reached.
So are you, because I think I get what you're saying, but I want to see if I can put it into words. Do you mean like that you have discovered your voice and you know what you like to do, and now it bothered you a little bit, if that's the right word, that you're just hoping that some audience out there is going to resonate with what you're doing?
Yes.
Okay.
I was definitely bothered, and I wasn't bothered at them. I was bothered at myself for not exactly knowing
Right.
where to find this audience, or
And that's a great
that
place, I think, to start, not to be like, well, if they don't get it, because I think in classical music, people sort of go, in general, oh, it's so good that if they don't find it,
right,
you know,
they blame
they're
the
missing
audience.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's audience blaming, and it's disrespectful to the audience,
Right.
and that needs to go both ways. We need to have an audience that respects what we do, but we need to respect the audience. And so for me, I discovered that I was not reaching my audience because I was looking in the wrong place.
Okay.
And I sat down one day. I mentioned improvisation before. Improvisation has been a huge part of my career. And after studying with Vanessa for the year, I
That's when you started
improvised.
exploring it in Australia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And then I just kept pushing and just improvising more and more, which was it's a personal sort of thing, but you really develop a lot as a musician when you improvise. Even if you don't decide to do that as a career, it's just good to do on your instrument, period. And I just came up with some sounds that sounded like a bicycle. Pure and simple. It sounded like a bicycle. And the story is that one morning, it was, and I woke up really early. Just keep in mind, I'm living in Italy, by the way. And I got a coffee, sat down by a fountain, because there are fountains everywhere. And I wrote a story called The Lost Bicycle. It was just in my head. It just came out. And it's a story about how Mother Earth gives her son a bicycle for his 6th birthday. And he loves it and rides it everywhere. But then after a storm, he loses it. And he goes looking for it, and he finds different animals that each rode the bicycle, but then passed it off to another animal. Eventually, he goes home, and the dog is waiting there with his bike. And that's how the dog became man's best friend. It's a sweet little story that I wrote, very simple, but the story doesn't end there. I then went into my office space at Fabrica, and I composed music, percussion music, to go along with the story. So essentially, I tell the story orally while playing percussion instruments. And it's a lot like a Peter and the Wolf quality, where there are leitmotifs attached to different characters and actions and movements and places. And I played it. I did this whole thing in about 24 hours.
Wow.
And I played it for Andrea, the head of music at Fabrica. And he just kind of put up his hands, and he's like, yeah, you need to do more of this. Like, okay.
That's awesome.
And this is me coming from this crazy experimental avant-garde scene, right? And all of a sudden I wrote a children's story with music where I created the first elements of percussive storytelling. I didn't create the rest of it there. It was just that story. And the concept was just in my head. And so I decided to write more stories. And I composed a few more. And a couple of people, other students or other people, I don't know, you play in these little things here and there. And so some people had heard a couple. And one girl who sang in a church, and she said, like, oh, they're doing this family service, and I bet they'd love to have one of your stories. Yeah. It's like, oh, cool. So I did it because it's a church gig, and you know, when you're a poor grad student, you take any gig you can get.
Yeah.
But later that day, I was supposed to drive up to Chicago. This was a Sunday, and because a good friend of mine up there had this dance company, and I was playing with them, and that's what I wanted to do. But the church gig basically paid for gas and, so it was one of those, what do I do? Stupid church gig or the dance thing I really want to do? And I did the church gig and then went to Chicago. And the next day I wake up to an email from a lawyer that says, we need to talk. And in the email, he had copy and pasted my bio from my website, which was very curious, right? Just made no sense. So I go back to Kansas and meet with this lawyer who turns out is a philanthropist, patron of the arts. And he looks me in the eye and says, I want to fund you to do your storytelling.
So he was at that church gig, essentially.
He was at the church. So if I had turned down the stupid church gig, which I didn't want to do in the first place,
yeah,
I wouldn't have met him. Cash. Yeah, and he essentially gave me a 2-year grant for $50,000. And how it worked was I would offer the program for free. And I would be paid externally through his foundation. And that way, I could reach more places and get to audiences and people in Kansas, because his whole thing was bringing the arts throughout Kansas, which is a state that is not necessarily known for the arts. So it was a wonderful idea. And I sent out a message to a listserv of teachers and librarians in May. In that summer, I did 150 shows.
Wait, just in 3 months you did it?
Yes.
Wow.
Three or four a day.
In libraries and stuff like that?
Libraries, schools, community centers, boys and girls clubs, hospitals, retirement homes. I played next to a nuclear power plant.
Wow.
I went to a school in Kansas that had not had a guest artist in 11 years.
Wow.
Which means that in 2 whole generations of kindergarten through 5th graders had never seen
a
concert at all.
Wow.
And this was all paid externally through this foundation. The wonderful thing that he did was he was hands-off in regards to content. He had no care in the world of what I did. No oversight. And it was just, do your thing. And when you do that many shows in a short period of time, when you're creating, a journalist named Malcolm Gladwell, who is truly great, kind of sociologist, psychologist, writer, refers to it as a tipping point. And most successful projects or people have a tipping point. The Beatles did, actually. People talk about the Beatles, how did they get so good and do all this music? Well, it turns out that they had like a residency at this place in, was it Germany or France? Where was it? And they basically played a few hundred shows in a year. And that many shows in a short amount of time basically solidifies your product.
Okay, so I have that book, and it's in my house. It was given to my husband for a present, and I've never read it. But so what is exactly the tipping point?
The tipping point is when you reach a point where you've done so much that you've fully vested a product.
Okay, so you fully know what it is. You
basically live inside of it.
Okay.
You've done it so much that it becomes a natural part of who you are.
Okay. And it needs to be a short amount of time, you think? Like a lot of things in a short amount of time condensed?
That's generally what it's referred to, or how it's referred to.
Okay.
And so that's when like the dam broke, right? I had all these stories, and that's when I played so often that I created my performance. I created the program. I created the business model. I created all of this stuff that at the time I didn't really know I had. I was just doing show after show after show.
Okay.
But through that process, I created my business.
Right. And so that's what I wanted to ask you is how there's always
storytelling.
Sort of that, there's like that gap where you have this thing. How do I turn it into a business?
Yep. And so for me, it was the support of the foundation, which was phenomenal. I mean, I can't downplay how awesome it is to receive funding for your arts project. But the money was one thing. The access to venues And my audience was really what did it. Because every day I'm performing in front of hundreds and hundreds of kids. I mean, it was tens of thousands by the end of the summer. And me being a creature of detail and research, I took a lot of notes. I like journals of my performances, of what worked, what didn't work. And I was constantly doing the scientific method of changing one variable at a time, right? Just kind of doing a little bit here and there until by the end of the summer, I was this well-oiled machine, and it was a pretty kick-ass program.
Wow.
And I got press, like there was press behind it. And so with any sort of success begets more success and attention. And the foundation then, I applied and received money for a grant to record a CD. Because at this time I had enough stories, well, I didn't actually, but I then had to write a few more. But I had the product, and I had this new audience. I realized that my voice was like screaming out loud in this audience. Like I was fully into it. I loved it. I was passionate about it. To this day, I still love it. There's not a sense of work that goes into it. It's a really creepy feeling when you're working, but it doesn't feel like work. It's bizarre. Maybe creepy is not the right word. It's just a very odd feeling. I don't know what the right word is, but it's like I'm going to work, but there's nothing work-like about it. And
there's no resistance to doing it. You just want to do it all the time.
Within myself, exactly. And I recorded a CD, and the CD won a ton of awards, like national arts awards.
You're in a zone.
Parenting awards.
You're like in a zone with it.
Exactly. It was flowing, and it was wonderful. And I had no professor. I had no supervisor, remember. I'm a grad student.
Right.
This is like what I'm doing.
You're still doing the grad work.
This was like at the beginning of grad school. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like, okay. So I get nominated for all these awards. I win these awards. I'm then like start traveling to other countries doing this as a grad student.
Were you invited? People found out about it and
I started,
you, or did you reach out?
I started reaching out,
okay.
and creating content. And during these periods, I said I took a lot of notes, and when I would take breaks from things, because I was in school, so I did have to study Baroque music, which I don't understand why, but I had to.
Because it was part of the curriculum, right?
Because it's part of what they say you have to do.
Yeah, which is why, I mean, I could see why it probably helped you to have that stipend and everything else, and luckily you didn't have a teacher breathing down your neck about what you had to do, but it sucks that you still had to do some other things.
So, this is where they probably would have told me not to do it because it would take away from my general musical studies within the program. But I didn't have anybody telling me to do anything, so I just did it. Then they finally hired someone.
Oh, good.
So then I end up with a professor who then tries to pull me back out of that world. And this is when I started noticing a resistance within the musical world to what I was doing.
Okay.
And by musical world, I mean like the Western classical conservatory scene.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. It was, people started saying it wasn't good enough. It wasn't hard enough. It wasn't what you were supposed to do as a classical musician. It was belittling to classical music. It was dumbing down classical music.
They were saying this stuff to you.
Yeah, it was not using my skill set properly because I could do actual art. These are different things over that time period that people would say. Essentially, that I was a failure in the Western classical music sense because I decided to perform for children.
But nothing to the fact that you just created an entire body of work and built a business.
Oh, nothing about that at all.
No, just that you are doing what they
They weren't doing what they knew. And that's one of the problems with the schools. They teach what they know. And what they don't know scares the hell out of them because they don't know it. It's not their expertise. And sometimes you get programs where people are open. They understand their expertise and they want their students to explore. Vanessa in Australia was like that. She was a university professor, right? She's a professor, but she wants everyone to develop their voice and pursue what their voice tells them to pursue. So I'm not going to use a blanket statement and say all universities are like that, but I ran into a lot of resistance. And so I had to finish my doctorate to get the hell out. And so I had to play nice, although I didn't actually play nice. Probably to this day, there's still like notes about me in the dean's office about being an absolute pain in the ass. Because I just didn't understand why they wouldn't let me pursue my research area.
Right. Because you invented the research area. That's why, right?
Yeah, I came in with a clear-cut research area, and they didn't like that. They wanted to tell me what to do. And I said, no, but I want to do this.
So what was
not work?
What did you say your research area was? Storytelling
the relationship between speech and percussion.
Okay. Why? I don't even understand. I mean, I know I didn't get a doctorate, but I know that you can pick something. It could be something like all the etudes ever written by this one composer for horn. And that's accepted as a doctoral line of study. So I don't even understand why anything that you make up would be not allowed, you know?
Because I was in control of the content, and that means that I was creating my research.
Oh.
And it wasn't something that was pre-existing.
Okay.
And they had a big problem with that.
That makes sense academically, but not in real world.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And what they failed to understand and read was my body of research on the connection between what I was doing to the rest of music. And so when you look at my body of work, when I was in Australia, I was doing pieces for speech and percussion, but avant-garde new music pieces by serious composers, right? All I did was channel all of my loves into one project. I just picked and grabbed all the things that I liked from all these different areas of music and put them into percussive storytelling. So they failed to recognize that this truly was a byproduct of my education. They just saw it as me dumbing down classical music to the masses, so to speak. And to this day, there's still people, I see them at conventions and who think that what I've done is a waste of time. But here's where things I have the last laugh in some ways. So I had a lot of success with this, and I moved out to Los Angeles with my wife, and she got an actual job because, you know, people in science get real jobs. After they graduate. And I started freelancing, and still to this day, I'm still a general freelancer, you know, doing what classical musicians do. But I push storytelling to the next level in touring it and presenting it and creating now videos. And I have a second CD. I wrote a children's book. Then I wrote a second children's book. And all this has taken place over the last 5 years, to the point now where I just had my 500th performance of percussive storytelling.
Oh, wow.
Over 500. Thank
amazing.
you. And 9 different countries now to close to 140,000 kids.
It's incredible.
2 CDs, 2 children's books, and I love what I do every single day that I do it. And I'm not bragging about it. I'm proud of it. I'm proud because I pushed through the bullshit in our school system and kept pushing because I knew from my work in Australia and Italy and as a preschool teacher, I knew what I wanted to do and I knew where my voice was best served. And so essentially I just kept at it, which was not necessarily easy. But looking back at it now, you kind of point to those aha moments or those moments where you could have stopped doing what you were doing, but you decided to keep pushing. And then the irony part is I move out here to LA and I'm gigging and I'm doing a lot of storytelling. And I have a kid and then I have a second kid and my wife works 9 to 5 and I'm a stay-at-home dad still. In fact, as we are speaking, my 4-year-old is in the back room yelling at me for crackers because he's homesick from school while I am talking to you a podcast about how I have forged an innovative path for my career. So I've been a stay-at-home dad, and which means that basically I gig nights and weekends.
Yeah.
And occasionally other times and get a babysitter. And then, of course, there's school. My daughter's in elementary school. My son will be. And there are all kinds of programs here and there. So it's not like I'm home every minute of the day. But my second year in Los Angeles, I was doing a lot of work. But still, I'm a stay-at-home dad. Keep that in mind. My old professor, one of them, I'm not going to say which.
Right. I'm not supposed to pinpoint
after me. I'm still getting ribbed at this point to become a university professor because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, because you have a doctorate.
Like, when are you going to give up this dream and get a real job? That's what I was told. And I have emails to prove it. When are you going to do this? You need to do this. Give this up. This is not going anywhere. Well, I mentioned before that our university system's pretty broken, and it's because the market's so saturated with qualified candidates.
Yeah.
Universities are paying less and requiring you to do more. It's simple economics, okay? They're just taking advantage of the system. They're not mean-spirited. They're not evil people. It's just that's the reality of economics.
Yeah.
And so my professor is working 12 to 14-hour days, nights, weekends, holidays, teaching weird classes. They have you do things that are completely outside of your area because they just don't want to hire anyone else.
Right.
And was making a paltry salary of maybe $40,000 a year. I'm a stay-at-home dad in Los Angeles doing what I want to do, doing storytelling. And that second year I was out here, I made $24,500. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Not far off from a professor's salary.
Right.
I was working just random nights and weekends. So for me, the joke is on them.
And
raising
home.
My kids, staying home.
And not paying, someone else to raise your kids while because let's be honest, those professors, if they have kids, they're taking half of that salary and paying somebody else to take care of their kids because
precisely
it's not cheap.
And so, of course, you can understand I do have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about certain experiences.
It's okay. You can have that.
But that's my experience, so I'm allowed to have that feeling. But there was some immense pride. I don't care about the money, but there was some immense pride when I was able to see on paper how close I was to what they were making, but not doing any of the crap that they had to do.
Yeah.
And complained about.
Yeah.
Like they would complain about that stuff all the time. And and for me, I'm pursuing my passion. And
not only that, you get to live where you want. I mean, if you're looking for a university job, you've got to take whatever university is hiring a percussion teacher.
In whatever town, which generally now with so few openings is going to be in possibly not a metropolitan area with a vibrant art scene.
Exactly, because those schools are taken by people who have big jobs in performing ensembles.
Yep.
Most of the time, right?
Yes. So anyway, the negative experience aside, which it served a vital role. I mean, I think that period of my life, which at the time I thought was just horrible and terrible and no good and dirty and rotten, probably were the best years creatively for me in my entire life.
Yeah, and
because I was in control. I was given the time and the freedom to actually explore this stuff. And because of that, I truly grew into myself. Like I told you before that in Australia, I had my voice. It was there, but it didn't have an audience. And in Italy, I was like, wait, I need to try to get my voice lined up with the right audience. Well, then in Kansas, I found my audience.
Yeah.
So then I matched everything together. And it was like, boom, I got it. This is what I want to do.
It's almost like you did voice. You found your voice, you found your audience, and then the third level was like solidifying that. Because you got the inkling of who your audience was in Italy, and then you developed it in Kansas, and then were able to, like you said, experience that tipping point where it all came together for you. So like I think about if you would have not done Australia and ended up in a university setting, you could see how none of it would have happened.
Exactly. None of it would have happened. So yes, without Australia, it wouldn't have happened. But then you can go back further and say without Northwestern, it wouldn't have happened because they gave me the tools. So I'm just a firm believer in not fate. I don't believe in that, but I believe in that everything leads to the next thing. Meaning, all the training I had led to Australia to pursue something I was interested in, which led to Italy to pursue more interest in, to Kansas, and you make your own luck, right? Like I had this stuff in my back pocket, and then I was asked to play at this church, which then led to a grant to go around performing, which created my business, which allowed me to flourish as an artist.
What was the missing, or what's the, not missing, but what was the quality, would you say, that you had that led you in these directions?
You mean personal quality?
Yeah, personal quality, or just thought process.
Wow, that's a great question. Well,
because a lot of percussionists would be like, okay, I'm at Northwestern. That's a pretty good school for undergrad. Maybe I should stay here and keep studying with, I don't know, Chicago Symphony people, or maybe I should go to New York or Philly and study with some of those famous percussion people, like, and just be sort of at the effect of what the teacher says you should do next. But you weren't like that. So I don't know, maybe there's like an openness or just sort of a fire in your gut that was like, this isn't what I want. I don't know. There's just something else. There's some other level that I think when people do creative things and create their own thing, there's a thinking outside the box, whether it's entirely conscious all the time or not. You know what I mean?
Right. I agree about it not necessarily being conscious, because when I was young in undergrad, I mean, I didn't know the world. I didn't know much at all.
Right.
I was just an undergraduate sponge picking up different things.
Yeah. Most people
and
are,
what I can say is, like, I remember auditioning for the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, which is a training orchestra, essentially. And it's a great program. And I'm preparing for it, doing excerpts, which is how you audition for it. And it was just so mind-numbingly boring for me. Other people love it. I'm not down, like, people who do it are phenomenal. And I love classical music and orchestral music, and
Yeah.
I love it. But for me personally, I'm sitting there playing thinking to myself, like, this just isn't me.
Right.
I just didn't feel comfortable. I was antsy. And so because I was antsy, I started looking outside of that. And that's when I found the Australia connection.
Yeah. So you were
when
open
I went
enough.
over there,
You were open enough, and
I was looking, I was searching,
exactly.
seeking,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Self-awareness. So I think self-awareness is probably how you could sum it up, right?
And a hell of a lot of stubbornness, because I've always been the student who does not accept anything a teacher says blindly.
Right.
I research everything. I check what they say, because I know that for me, I'm not always an expert in my field. When I have students who ask me questions, like I catch myself white lying all the time. Like, well, wait a second, I don't actually know this, so I should just figure it out. So then, for me, growing up with two parents as teachers, I think I just realized that teachers don't necessarily know everything. They have the best intentions all the time. But as a student, you need to learn how and when to question and research further. And I think that that's a part of my personality that rubs people the wrong way and the right way sometimes, because I'm just always questioning, not questioning someone's intellect. I think that's sometimes where it comes across being mean. Or
yeah, but
questioning into intellectual terms of like, wow, that's curious, let's explore that further.
Right. And also you kept curious and research based when you were developing your program.
Very much so. I researched so much. It's the part of storytelling that, or of percussive storytelling that people don't know, they don't see, was the thousands of hours of research and development that went into it. They hear a 5-minute story called The Turnip, and that's it. They don't know that story took me a few hundred hours to essentially produce from top to bottom. At that time, I was reading hundreds of stories a week. I was just reading. I was in the library just reading anthologies of folktales from dozens of countries, and then trying to find stories that resonated with me and with the program. And now I'm to the point where I know how to compose these stories. I know what to look for, to seek out, or to write on my own. But at the time, I was just like a complete bookworm.
That's great to know. You researched, you taught yourself how to tell stories, because, someone listening right now, including myself, would go, "Oh, he just came up with stories out of his noggin." But like you researched and figured out how to tell stories and what the stories would be about.
I watched videos. I took a couple lessons with people. I watched storytellers, performance artists, and I came up with my program based on all of this research. And so my program today, if you watch it, and if you watch me online in my videos, or if you see me play live, you're going to say, wow, you're just like a normal guy telling stories. And that's what thousands of hours of research came up with. I tried everything from acting to doing, like when you tell a story and you do voices for characters.
Yeah.
I tried all that. I don't do any of it. I'm just me. What I found at the very end of all of this research was just to be myself while I perform. And that's the number one comment I get from people after performances is, you just seem like you're you while you play. And that's like the best compliment that I ever get. Whenever I hear that, it just makes me so happy. Because after years of research and development, it's like it comes full circle, and all of the data points to just you being you. And you're like, oh, well, I probably could have done that from the beginning, but thanks.
I just love that. That is so great. And it's actually really,
so
it's
I don't
really
dress up,
interesting.
I just wear t-shirt and jeans or t-shirt and shorts. And when I talk to the kids, I talk to them like I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah, you
And
don't
that's
talk
how I
down to
was as a
them
preschool teacher
right.
as well. But that's where that whole concept came from, doing the preschool teaching thing. And I realized that they just want to talk to you like people.
Right.
So talk to them like people. And that's how this all sort of developed. So I don't do any extra performative element. It's just me with my instruments and my voice. And so it's super low tech, but at the same time, it comes from so much research and thinking about how I want to present this.
That's great. So if you had to give advice to other musicians based on your journey for creating a career or navigating their education, what would you say?
Well, if let's see here, one thing that I've been doing a lot the last couple of years, and I don't know, I mean, this is a podcast, and I'm talking about other podcasts, but
that's okay.
How I Built This by Guy Raz. You ever heard of that one?
No.
It's basically a show about entrepreneurs and innovators and the movements that they created. So he'll basically just interview someone who, let's see here, Instagram or Airbnb or Steve Madden's shoes. He interviews these people.
Okay.
And basically what you're doing to me is just talking about their life story and how they developed their thing. And one of the commonalities that I've noticed through that in myself is that when you find a point of resistance or something that feels quite uncomfortable or iffy or tenuous, that's where you should go.
Okay.
That's a good thing. When you start getting the resistance, and not just from people, maybe it's just from production or creation, that means you're on the right track. Because generally speaking, these movements and these programs and these things that develop long legs develop because it's not already in existence. Right. And to get something into existence, you have to push past the points of resistance. So if you have a desire to create a chamber music ensemble or a dance group or an interdisciplinary, collaboratory, collective type thing, and you run into some difficulties, you should focus your energy on those difficulties. It's counterintuitive. You want to focus on the strengths. You want to focus on how things are working, right?
Yeah.
And in reality, you should be doing the opposite. Because if the thing that's working is going to keep working. But when you find something that is not quite working, then that's probably, there's probably a bigger payoff on the other side.
Okay.
And that's certainly what I've run into, where I hit a brick wall, and instead of trying to find a way around the brick wall, that's when I roll up my sleeves. Or instead of backtracking, I'm like, okay, let's do this. This brick wall means that there's something really good on the other side.
Yeah.
And I just have this determined to go through that wall, no matter what it takes. And I piss some people off along the way. Absolutely. I have this reputation as being a very kind of sweet, easygoing, flexible musician, and I'm a kids artist, But the reality is, I have a fire in my belly, and this is how I get it out. This is my passion, and nothing will get in my way of that. And so I definitely have a little bit of a cutthroat attitude. And that's important, because if you're trying to create a business or a livelihood, and keep in mind that this I make a decent living doing this. That this program that I created from nothing. You have to have a little bit of a cutthroat attitude to stay afloat, you know? And so, I don't mean like dealing with competitors or
Right.
being like a ruthless
What do you mean
CEO
by cutthroat? Like just as far as your own motivation, or
own motivation, as well as motivating others to want your program.
okay.
You can't become complacent with what you're doing, and that's a difference. In that, if you get a job at a orchestra or a tenure track position as a professor, motivation tends to go away
Right.
because you've done it, and you don't need to worry about where the next paycheck comes from. You're salaried; it's going to come, and you just kind of get in this cycle, and your motivation just kind of tends to diminish. But if you run your own business or your own program, that can't happen, because that means the program will simply disappear or your
Right.
business will go under. And that's hard. it's time consuming, it's
Yeah.
hard, and it's mentally exhausting, which is the other thing. And I can definitely say that over 9 years of doing this, it's quite exhausting. But the payoff on the other side now is that I've finally gotten to the point where I'm a known entity within my world, or
Yes.
my the children's world, or the whatever you want to call it. And so,
Yeah, it's your genre. It's a genre of music,
right,
really, right?
yes,
Educational musical performances is definitely a genre, and it's like every symphony has a kids series, and
yep,
that might be where
and
you're going next. I don't know.
yeah. Well, what's very interesting about what you're saying is I've done all these performances, these programs, but now it's developing further. I'm developing relationships with school districts where I'm talking to the superintendent of instruction. I'm talking to the Los Angeles Philharmonic education department.
Great.
Other organizations. I'm parlaying my experience in the field into collaborations with existing arts organizations that have an educational outreach component. And so an unintended side effect or side benefit of percussive storytelling is that now I've branded myself as an expert in arts outreach.
Yeah.
And that was not what I was going for at all. It was not intentional. But now people are contacting me saying, oh, wow, you did this. Can you help us do this? Or can you be a part of this?
That's so
And
great.
so it's kind of
So
cool,
in a
because
way, you
now
can be a consultant. That's like another income stream potentially too.
it is another income stream, but it's also a another like it helps the outlet of the program continue to reach more and diverse audiences,
Yes.
which is exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to keep performing, and I want to keep reaching these kids. I want to keep bringing the arts to kids all over the place. That's my mission. That hasn't changed. But being able to partner with these large arts organizations
Yeah.
that have an incredible reach allows me to then reach more. And then the more experience I have with that just further helps me get other things like that. So you see it as the snowball effect. It just
Yes.
kind of keeps progressing.
It's
And
phenomenal. I love it.
it's absolutely awesome. And I mean, the one thing I haven't mentioned that I think is very important to mention is that in the years of doing this, I'm telling you all the accolades all the awards, all the awesome things, because I'm proud and I'm trying to make it sound like I'm a really, really cool success story to pump myself up. But the reality is I failed so many times.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing was an absolute shit show for a while. I mean, just absolutely in utter disarray. I mean, I can't even begin to say how many times I failed doing this. Failed as a performer, failed as a creator, failed as a business person.
Do you mean like for failures? Do you mean like audience didn't get it, people didn't show up, you didn't get paid?
Sure.
Did you lose money at some point as a business person?
Every single thing you're saying.
Okay.
I mean, me failing as a performer, which I take very personally, and that's the element that I have control over. So the performative side, I have had many failures there. Because guess how many arts, business, or music industry courses I had in my career? In my education. 0.
Right.
I didn't even know what a CV or resume or bio or any of that was. And now not a single clue.
Right.
Which I think is an absolute travesty if a university does not make that mandatory for undergraduate music students.
Right. Now it's entrepreneurship is sort of a thing you can do on the side.
It's getting there.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. I will admit it's getting there, but oh man, I had a contract. What the hell's a contract?
Yeah.
You just show up and play and someone gives you cash. Taxes? What the hell are those? I mean, there's so many things, but also just being your own advocate.
Yeah.
Which is really the main puzzle piece missing from the university system is that they're your advocate. Your professor is your advocate. You're under their auspices. And for me, I had to become my own advocate when I didn't have the professor. Well, right?
that was given to you by mistake in a way, and it's a good thing that it was. And so, like, I'm about to put a post up, and I'm still editing it about alternatives to college, and it's probably going to piss some people off. I don't care because I want my idea. My goal is to start a conversation and get people talking, and it's my list of ideas of things you could do instead of college. I really think I just wish people, and I wish I would have done it for myself, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about it, and envious of people like you who, even though you were going to college, you went to another country, you explored, you got out of your own box
our system.
And the system and everything else. And I think people, especially today, like you and I did this without the internet. Like you said you had to send a VHS tape. Nowadays, you can find teachers in Europe and all over the United States and wherever you want to go, South America, I don't know, to Asia, wherever you want to go, and find people to study with that are doing something unique. You can go you can go explore, you can go see concerts of all kinds. Like, you don't need to dump all your money into a system where you sit in a classroom and are told something. Like, it's not necessary anymore. Even if you decide to go later, like, you have this incredible tool. You have the internet. You can find opportunities yourself. You just have to be your own advocate, like you said.
You have to be your own advocate, and you have to not be afraid to explore.
Yeah.
And just try things out, and understand that 9 out of the 10 things you try out aren't going to work.
Right.
And that's something that I feel needs to be taught more or pushed more. Is just when you become your own advocate, you don't get to lean back on anybody else to help get you through the tough times. And when I mentioned earlier the resistance, like when I hit that brick wall, that's when I get excited. If I was not my own advocate, that wouldn't happen. I would go backwards and go to someone and say, please help me around this brick wall.
Right. Yeah.
And instead, now it's me.
Yes.
Just me.
Because that's what the real world is. And that's actually what people, I think, avoid by staying in school. I mean, that's what I did anyway.
Yeah, or they can. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's something that people do. And I did that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I think we all do to a certain degree.
But eventually you have to experience it.
Yes, eventually
Yeah.
you have to. And the failures are, I mean, this is something that many people say, but it's true. The failures are more important than the successes.
Yeah.
You learn far more from the failures. Like the time that I lost out on $700 because I didn't get a contract, and showed up to a gig, but they had double booked the place, and the lady forgot to tell me, right? But since I didn't have a contract in place, they just said sorry, and I was out the money.
Oh, man.
Right?
Well, that's learning the hard way, right?
I was mad.
Yeah.
I was mad at them until I realized that was my mistake.
Right.
That's on me. Now, ask me how many times that's happened since.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, that's one of many failures and situations like that I had as this has developed over the years. And now that it's definitely working a lot better and is more of a true business model, I don't run into that as often, but that still comes up.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out ways around that.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, excuse me. Do you have anything that you'd like to promote coming up with percussive storytelling?
Well, I mean, I do have my 2 CDs.
Yes.
And
I'll definitely link to those all in the show notes so people can find out about them and find out where to buy them.
Yeah. So. And the book's fairly new. It came out last June. It's a chapter book, so it's a middle grade book for kids age 8 to 12. And there's no music as part of this. This is just a book.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no music. It's just a children's novel. So it's another industry I'm pushing into.
That's great.
That is a side benefit of the storytelling. I'm going to be coming out with a couple more videos, and
this is on your YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Is that where you primarily are as far as content?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much that, and my website. I mean, the albums are up on my website for everyone to listen to. I'm always trying to get more people to watch videos or to just talk about the program. I've had a lot of people in the last couple of years perform stories of mine.
Oh, that's
so
great.
There's been a growing interest of young percussionists to play some of these stories.
Okay, so do you sell sheet music, or how does that work?
I only have notated. That's the thing. These are all in my head, all my stories. I've notated 2.
Okay.
So people can get them from me, and I don't sell them. I just, if anyone is actually interested, and like, that is so cool. And so it's pretty neat to hear different versions of these stories. But the main thing that I preach with it is that I don't own this. I didn't create anything new. Storytelling in music has been around for thousands of years. This is not a new concept. I've simply put a modern stamp on it in my artistic discipline. This is my voice. My instrument happens to be percussion. That's how I created it. That's what I did, right? But this is nothing new. So people who are interested in it, I encourage them to do their own thing, Write your own story. Set it to music. Just try it out. See if you like it. Get in front of a young audience, and then they'll know what's going on. Because they will certainly tell you.
That's great. I love it. Well, Cory, thank you so much for telling your story today on Crushing Classical. I really appreciate it. And I, for one, am super inspired by so much stuff that you've said today. So thank you so much.
No, thanks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on and being able to talk candidly about
absolutely
the story, because that's one thing that sometimes you don't feel like you're able to truly tell the whole story.
No, I know.
Because you worry about pissing people off or saying something you shouldn't say.
I know, and
I'm
I
not
want to
trying to
break
throw
that.
anyone under the bridge here or bus or whatever the expression is. But I'm trying to talk in more generalities of our educational system and generalities of artistic development.
Absolutely. And
I
I
just
think
think
people need to say more the truth. You know, they just need
yeah,
to.
and
Yeah.
whenever anyone says there are no jobs, I get so pissed because there is so much work out there. And if you're an artist who is saying that there is no work, then you are clearly not looking hard enough. There is a lot of work out there. There is a lot of wonderful, incredible opportunity for the arts. It's just not as easy to find as maybe it once was. But it is there. And in fact, I firmly believe that it's greater than it has been in the past because of private donors and because of other avenues to explore for funding. You just have to...
You have to make it.
You have to look for it. You have to seek it out and go after it yourself. But I'm incredibly positive when it comes to the arts in our country. There's all this funding being cut, and people are complaining about that, as they should. But there's still a lot out there, and I just encourage all students, young and old, to just keep seeking it out because it is there.
Awesome. Great advice. Love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.